From his biggest gamble for the epic showdown against Jon Jones, to the UFC president announcing a shocking matchup triggered by the Predator's boxing debut, Francis Ngannou reveals his biggest threat right now. For one, the fight against Jon Jones is still a very real possibility, even after the fact that Ngannou had to gamble over his controversial UFC exit. I mean, right before he decided to become a free agent, Dana White offered him an $8 million deal for the Ultimate Showdown. But the former UFC heavyweight champion decided to vacate his belts inside and focus on his boxing career. Let's just say the timing was terrible, with Ngannou's shocking UFC exit coming in right when the MMA world was ready to welcome Jones back after his 3-year hiatus. At the time, fans thought Jones was gearing up to challenge the former UFC heavyweight champion for his title by the end of 2023. But clearly, that wasn't going to happen now. So instead, he went on to beat Cyril Garn to win the vacant heavyweight belt. Fast forward to Ngannou's PFL deal. The Predator still wants to fight Bones, but that's only going to happen if the UFC decides to meet him halfway, because both fighters want that fight, and they've only got Dana White standing in their way. Like Ngannou said, that fight is always there, and it can always happen. UFC just needs to compromise a bit and give fans what they want. But Dana White isn't open to the idea of a cross-promotional fight between the top heavyweights in MMA. If you ask White, he thinks the Jones versus Ngannou super fight isn't going to work, whether that's because the UFC refused to co-promote or Ngannou's impossible financial demands. But the Cameroonian fighter's representative, Markel Martin, claims that he's willing to negotiate demands if the UFC gives him a shot at it. But then again, these conversations aren't new, and Ngannou spent 2 years trying to sort it out with the UFC right before his exit. But if you ask me, there was some kind of rivalry with the Predator right from the start. His manager calls it the Conor McGregor affect, where the UFC decided to step back from its biggest heavyweight fighter thanks to a bunch of business reasons. Think about Conor. He made so much money from his boxing fight, and the UFC didn't want anything of that sort happening again. So White decided to hold back the best fighters he's got, and Ngannou made it to the top of the list. Of course, no one really confirmed or denied these theories, but it's anyone's best guess right now. If the UFC had let Ngannou kickstart his boxing career, I don't even think he would have left the UFC in the first place. As someone who made his ways from the streets to the UFC heavyweight belt, he knows what it's like to struggle. So during his round of negotiations, he set forth some reasonable demands, like better fighter pay and healthcare insurance, so the ones at the bottom don't have to struggle the way he did. But fighter pay and unions are triggers for the UFC president, even when it comes to the heavyweight GOAT, who's recovered from high-profile defeats, only to rebound with 4 back-to-back knockout wins over world-class opponents in less than 3 minutes combined. And let me tell you, MMA fans can't ever get over his destructive stoppage wins in his first 6 UFC fights, topped with his 2 brutal defeats, only to earn a second crack at the heavyweight championship with his 4 shocking wins. At this point, the one defeat he couldn't get over was the one to Stipe Miocic. And call it revenge or whatever, but with a second-round knockout win over his rival, Ngannou became the UFC's heavyweight champion. Let's just say, the Predator put together a strong first round, because not only did he attack his rival with a couple of deadly punches, he also defended an insane takedown for the championship belt. Clearly, there was a huge improvement from his first fight up until the sequel. And this version of Ngannou wasn't someone to mess with, because in one swoop, he avenged one of the only 2 losses under the UFC banner and set up his terrifying title reign. All of that combined had UFC opponents terrified. Just think about it. I'm talking the former UFC heavyweight champion, who knocked out 4 opponents in 2 minutes and 42 seconds combined, which even includes 2 wins under 30 seconds. Moving forward, the UFC had 2 options for him. One was a trilogy fight to settle the score with Miocic, and another was obviously a much-awaited fight with Jon Jones. If anything, a super fight with Jones would have become the biggest matchup the UFC could make right now. But with both options, Ngannou would have to prove his worth and defend his position at the top. But his last fight was back in 2022, when he defended his heavyweight title against Garn at UFC 270. Ever since then, fans are waiting for more insane highlights at PFL or in the boxing world. But his PFL debut isn't until 2024, and right now, he's gearing up for whoever's coming up against him, whether that's in the ring or in the cage. You see, with PFL, he's got the freedom to fight anyone he wants to, as long as the other party agrees to it. But right now his focus is set on his boxing debut, unless White swoops in with another offer for a Jon Jones fight, because there's no way he's turning it down now. And even though he's called out Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, and Deontay Wilder. He's finally managed to set up a fight with the Gypsy King, set to happen on October 28, 2023, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And while everything's at stake for the WBC champion, he's also got all the leverage in the ring, too. I mean, that's practically the only reason he agreed to it. Fury's looking for easy wins right now, and that's exactly why he turned down Joshua and Alexander Usyk, which could have ended up being the biggest fight in the history of the heavyweight division. Even when White came in with an offer with Jon Jones, the Gypsy King refused on the spot because he wasn't ready to lose his rep in the cage, knowing he wouldn't even last a minute in there up against the UFC heavyweight champion. The same would have been for Ngannou if the Cameroonian fighter hadn't already agreed to the fight in the ring. And even though Fury's practically ruining his legacy, Ngannou needs this fight right now, because the MMA legend isn't trying to look for easy wins to kickstart his boxing career. He's calling out the top heavyweights and ended up with the most controversial one out of all of them, Tyson Fury. Not to mention, they've hyped it up for years before finally setting it up. And while the 6'9" giant is known for using his size to tower over his opponents, no one can forget Ngannou's punching power. That set a record in the UFC. Clearly, the two of them have their chances. But if Ngannou manages to come out of the ring with a win, not only will he humiliate Fury, he'll also become the undisputed heavyweight king of his generation. Think about it. Everyone's gonna forgive Ngannou's defeat sooner or later, but no one's gonna get over Fury's defeat because he set everything at stake here, with zero excuses for a loss, no matter how good Ngannou may be. And whether that's a win or defeat, the former UFC heavyweight champion also has another fight with Wilder lined up. That does justice to both fighters. You see, it's a two-fight deal, one in the ring and one in the cage. That's something Fury would never agree to because he doesn't want to jinx his unbeatable record. So get ready to gear up for two huge boxing fights for the end of 2023, only to kickstart 2024 with his PFL debut. But the only threat he's got right now is coming in from UFC, and I'm talking about the panic announcement for a Miocic versus Jones fight. It's pretty obvious White called out the matchup, thanks to Ngannou's deal with Fury. The UFC president is setting up the Predators' rivals up against each other, just to overshadow him once again. Although, after becoming the heavyweight champion, fans were expecting Jones to defend his title soon enough anyway. But with the radio silence and the Predator calling him out for a crossover fight, no one was sure when the next fight was gonna happen. And let me tell you, whoever comes out of this as the winner, he'll definitely be paired up with Ngannou for a crossover fight, no matter how against White may be. Not to mention, if a defeat against Fury ruins any chances of his boxing career taking off, he won't find the PFL deal as great as it is right now, and might even want to move back to the UFC, where White's never gonna welcome him. But even if he does, Jones and Miocic have taken his place now, so he'd have to overtake them to take back his spot again. So there you have it, from the UFC president announcing a shocking matchup triggered by the Predators' boxing debut, to his biggest gamble for the epic showdown against Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou reveals his biggest threat right now.